The sound of her father's boots on the wooden porch sent 20-year-old Sarah Mitchell scrambling through the darkness toward the only sanctuary she could find, a weathered barn at the edge of the property where she had spent the last hour of this sweltering Texas night in 1876 trying to disappear into nothing. Her cheek still burned from where his hand had struck her earlier that evening. The third time this week, he had raised his fist in drunken rage, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that if she did not find somewhere to hide tonight, tomorrow might bring worse than bruises. The barn door creaked as she slipped inside, her worn calico dress catching on a rusty nail, and she bit back a cry of frustration as she heard the fabric tear. Behind her, the house erupted with her father's bellowing voice calling her name, each syllable dripping with the kind of fury that made her blood run cold. She pressed herself into the corner behind a stack of hay bales, her breath coming in short gasps as she tried to make herself as small as possible. The smell of horses and dried grass filled her nostrils, familiar and oddly comforting, despite the terror coursing through her veins. Through the gaps in the wooden slats, she could see the lamplight from the house, could hear her father stumbling around the yard, cursing her name and everything else that crossed his addled mind. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed he would give up, would drink himself into a stupor and forget about her for one more night. She had nowhere else to go. Her mother had died 3 years ago from fever, leaving Sarah alone with a man who had turned his grief into something ugly and violent. The small town of Redemption Creek offered little refuge for a young woman with no money and no family willing to take her in. Her father had made sure everyone knew she was trouble, spinning tales about her disobedience and wild ways, ensuring that decent folk kept their distance. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, her legs cramped from crouching in the same position. But she did not dare move. Finally, blessedly, she heard her father's footsteps retreat back toward the house, heard the slam of the door. Still, she waited, counting her heartbeats, listening for any sign that he might return. Dawn was just beginning to paint the sky pink when Sarah finally allowed herself to shift position. Her whole body ached, and she realized with growing despair that she could not go back to the house. Not today, maybe not ever. But what choice did she have? She had no horse, no money, nowhere to run. The realization brought tears to her eyes, hot and bitter. She must have dozed off despite herself because the sound of hoofbeats jolted her awake. Panic seized her heart as she wondered if her father had somehow acquired a horse, if he was coming to drag her back to the house. She peered through the slats, her whole body tensed to run. But the rider was not her father. A tall man dismounted from a beautiful chestnut mare, his movements easy and confident. He wore the dusty clothes of a working cowboy, his hat pulled low against the rising sun. Sarah held her breath as he led the horse toward the barn, clearly intending to water the animal at the trough just outside. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows, praying he would not come inside, but fortune was not with her today. The barn door swung open, and the cowboy stepped inside, leading his horse. He was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His jaw was strong and covered with a few days' worth of stubble, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue that seemed to take in everything at once. Those eyes found her almost immediately. Sarah's heart stopped as their gazes locked. She saw surprise flicker across his face, then concern as he took in her disheveled appearance, the bruise blooming across her cheek, the fear in her eyes. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice like warm honey. "I am not going to hurt you." Sarah said nothing, could not find her voice. She was acutely aware of how she must look, her hair tangled and full of hay, her dress torn, her face marked with violence. The cowboy took a step closer, then stopped, seeming to sense that she was on the verge of bolting. "My name is James Holloway," he said. "I am passing through, looking for work. Saw this place and thought maybe the owner might need a hand with the horses." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Are you hurt? Besides your face, I mean." Something in his tone, gentle and genuinely concerned, made the tight knot in Sarah's chest loosen just a fraction. "I am fine," she managed, though her voice came out hoarse and unconvincing. "You do not look fine," James said bluntly but not unkindly. "You look terrified, and you were hiding in a barn at dawn like you were being hunted." He glanced around, taking in the layout of the property visible through the barn door. "This your place?" "My father's," Sarah whispered. "I am Sarah Mitchell." Recognition flashed in James's eyes. Mitchell. That would be Frank Mitchell, the man who owns the spread just north of town? Sarah nodded, watching him carefully for any change in his demeanor. Most people in Redemption Creek either feared her father or wanted nothing to do with him. Frank Mitchell had a reputation as a mean drunk who could not keep hired help for more than a few weeks. I heard he was looking for a ranch hand, James said slowly. But I also heard things about his temper. His eyes flicked to her bruised cheek, and his jaw tightened. Did he do that to you? Sarah wanted to lie, to protect herself from the shame of admitting the truth, but something about this stranger made honesty spill from her lips. Yes. Last night. He was drunk, and I burned the dinner, and he just started hitting me. It was not the first time. James's expression darkened, a muscle working in his jaw. Where is he now? Sleeping it off in the house, I expect, Sarah said. He will wake up angry, looking for me. He always does. Fresh tears threatened, and she blinked them back furiously. I do not know what to do. I cannot go back there, but I have nowhere else to go. For a long moment, James was silent, and Sarah could see him thinking, weighing options. Then he looked at her with such intensity that it took her breath away. You can hide here forever, he said firmly. In this barn, on this property, wherever you need to be. I will take that job if he is still offering it, and I will make sure he does not lay another hand on you. I promise you that. Sarah stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. You do not even know me. Why would you help me? Because it is the right thing to do, James said simply. No woman should live in fear like that, especially not in her own home. He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know you have no reason to trust me. I am a stranger who just rode up out of nowhere. But I give you my word, Sarah Mitchell, that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. Something in his eyes, clear and honest, made Sarah want to believe him. She had spent so long with no one to rely on, no one to turn to, that the idea of having an ally seemed almost impossible. Yet, here was this cowboy, offering her protection without asking for anything in return. He will not like it, Sarah warned. My father. He will not like you interfering. Then he will have to get used to disappointment, James said, with a slight smile that did not quite reach his eyes. There was steel beneath his gentle manner, Sarah realized, a core of strength that suggested he could back up his promises. The sound of the house door banging open made them both freeze. Sarah's father's voice, rough and angry even from this distance, called her name. She shrank back instinctively, and James moved without thinking, positioning himself between her and the barn door. Stay behind me, he murmured. Let me handle this. Frank Mitchell appeared in the barn doorway moments later, his face red and puffy from drink, his eyes bloodshot. He was a big man, gone to fat in recent years, but still formidable when roused to anger. He stopped short when he saw James, confusion replacing some of the rage in his expression. Who the hell are you? Frank demanded. James Holloway, sir, James said politely, though his posture remained alert. I heard you might be looking for a ranch hand. I am good with horses and cattle, and I can do any kind of work you need done around the place. Frank's eyes narrowed suspiciously. I might be. What are you doing in my barn? Just watering my horse and looking around to see what kind of operation you are running, James said smoothly. Seems like you could use some help getting things in order. It was a calculated risk, pointing out the general state of disrepair that marked the Mitchell ranch. But James had judged correctly that Frank's pride would be outweighed by his need for cheap labor. The older man grunted, scratching his belly through his stained shirt. I can pay 50 cents a day plus room and board, Frank said. You will sleep in the barn and eat what we eat. You will work from sunup to sundown and do what I tell you without backtalk. Sounds fair, James agreed. When do I start? Now, Frank said. There are fences that need mending on the south pasture, and the horses need tending. He paused, his eyes suddenly focusing on the shadows behind James. Sarah, I know you're in there, girl. Get out here right now. Sarah emerged slowly from behind the hay bales, her head down, her whole body trembling. James felt a surge of protective anger at the fear radiating from her, but he kept his expression neutral. There you are, Frank snarled. Thought you could hide from me, did you? Get back to the house and make breakfast. And it better be hot and ready in 15 minutes, or you will be sorry. Sarah moved to obey, but as she passed James, he spoke quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. It will be all right, I promise. She glanced at him briefly, hope and fear warring in her brown eyes, then hurried toward the house. Frank watched her go with a scowl, then turned back to James. "My daughter is none of your concern," he said flatly. "You are here to work, not to get involved in family business. You understand me?" "Yes, sir," James said, though every fiber of his being rebelled against the words. He understood perfectly. He just had no intention of obeying. The morning passed in hard physical labor. James threw himself into the work, mending fences and hauling water and mucking out stalls, all while keeping one eye on the house. He caught glimpses of Sarah through the windows, moving about her chores, and each time he saw her flinch or move too quickly, his resolve hardened. By midday, the sun was blazing hot, typical for Texas in late summer. Frank had retreated to the shade of the porch with a bottle, already well on his way to drunk again. James made his way to the well for water and found Sarah there, drawing up a bucket. She looked startled when she saw him, then quickly glanced toward the house where her father sat. "You should not be talking to me," she whispered urgently. "He will notice." "Let him notice," James said, though he kept his voice low. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you again?" "No," Sarah said, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "He just yelled. He seems almost pleased to have someone else to do the work for once." She paused, studying James's face. "Why are you really doing this? You could find work anywhere. Why stay here where you know things will be difficult?" James took the dipper she offered and drank deeply before answering. "I lost my own mother when I was 12, he said quietly. "My father started drinking after that, became someone I did not recognize. He never hit me, but I saw the look in his eyes sometimes, and I knew he wanted to. I left home at 15 and have been on my own ever since." He met her gaze steadily. "I swore then that if I ever saw someone in a situation like that, someone who needed help, I would do something about it. I would not just ride away and pretend I did not see." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "That is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me." "It is just the truth," James said. He wanted to reach out and touch her hand, to offer some gesture of comfort, but he held back, sensing she was still too skittish for that. "I meant what I said this morning. You can hide here forever. I will find a way to protect you, Sarah. I promise." "I want to believe you," she whispered. "I want to so badly." "Then believe me," James said simply. "Give me a chance to prove it." Over the following days, a pattern emerged. James worked from dawn until dusk, taking on every task Frank threw at him without complaint. He was good at his work, better than any hand Frank had hired in years, and even the bitter old man had to acknowledge it. The ranch began to look more prosperous, the fences mended, the animals well tended, the barn organized and clean. Sarah watched James from a distance at first, afraid to hope that his protection would last. But day after day he kept his word. Whenever Frank's temper flared in her direction, James found a way to intervene, asking a question or pointing out something that needed attention, drawing the older man's anger away from his daughter. It was subtle enough that Frank did not seem to notice he was being managed, but Sarah saw it and felt a gratitude so profound it made her chest ache. She began to find excuses to be wherever James was working, bringing him water or mentioning some task that needed doing. They would talk quietly, careful not to draw Frank's attention, and Sarah discovered that James was unlike any man she had ever met. He was kind and thoughtful, quick to laugh, and he listened to her in a way that made her feel like her words mattered. James, for his part, found himself thinking about Sarah more and more. She was beautiful. That much was obvious despite the marks of her difficult life. But it was more than that. She was strong in a way that had nothing to do with physical power, and she possessed a quiet dignity that her father's cruelty had not been able to break. When she smiled, which happened more frequently as the days passed, it was like the sun breaking through clouds. 3 weeks after James arrived at the Mitchell Ranch, things came to a head. Frank had been drinking heavily all afternoon, his mood growing blacker by the hour. Sarah was preparing dinner when she accidentally knocked over a jar of preserves, sending it crashing to the floor. The sound brought Frank lurching into the kitchen, his face purple with rage. "You clumsy, worthless girl!" he roared, advancing on her with his fist raised. "I will teach you to be more careful." But before he could strike, James was there, stepping between them with his hand up. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to talk to you about the cattle in the north pasture," he said urgently. "I think some of them might be sick." "Get out of my way," Frank snarled, trying to push past him. James did not move. "Sir, this is important." If we have sick cattle, it could spread to the whole herd. Something in James's tone, firm and unyielding, finally penetrated Frank's drunken haze. He lowered his fist, glaring at James with suspicion and anger. This better not be some trick to get me away from my daughter. It is not a trick, James said evenly. But even if it was, I would not let you hit her. Not now, not ever again. The words hung in the air, dangerous and electric. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Frank's face went from red to nearly purple, his whole body shaking with fury. You dare to tell me what I can and cannot do in my own house? He shouted. You are just hired help. You have no right. I have every right to stop a man from beating a defenseless woman, James interrupted, his voice hard as iron. I do not care if she is your daughter or the Queen of England. You will not touch her again. For a moment, Sarah thought her father might actually attack James. Frank was bigger and heavier, but James was younger and clearly strong from years of hard work. They stood facing each other, the tension so thick it was hard to breathe. Then, to everyone's surprise, Frank deflated like a punctured bladder. You think you are some kind of hero, he muttered, stumbling back toward his chair. Fine. You want to protect her so badly, you deal with her. See how you like having an ungrateful daughter who cannot do anything right. He sank into his chair and reached for his bottle, apparently done with the confrontation. James waited a moment to make sure he was truly backing down, then turned to Sarah. She was trembling, her eyes wide with shock and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Are you all right? James asked softly. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. James reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and the simple touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. Clean up that glass carefully, he said quietly. I'm going to check on the horses. Come find me when you are done, if you need to talk. She nodded again, and he squeezed her hand briefly before heading out. Sarah stared after him, her heart pounding. Something had shifted tonight. Some invisible line had been crossed, and she knew with absolute certainty that nothing would ever be the same. Later that evening, after her father had drunk himself into his usual stupor and begun snoring in his chair, Sarah slipped out to the barn. She found James brushing down his horse, the rhythmic motion soothing in the lamplight. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face made her breath catch. I wanted to thank you, Sarah said, moving closer, for what you did tonight, for standing up to him. You do not need to thank me, James said, setting down the brush. I told you I would protect you, and I meant it. But you could get hurt, Sarah protested, or he could fire you and send you away. I do not want that to happen because of me. James stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. Sarah, I am not going anywhere unless you want me to. Do you understand? I am here, and I am staying, and your father is just going to have to accept that. Why? Sarah whispered. Why do you care so much about what happens to me? James reached up slowly, telegraphing his movement, and gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His touch was infinitely tender, and Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes at the kindness of it. Because from the moment I saw you hiding in this barn, scared and hurt and brave beyond measure, I felt something I have never felt before, James said quietly. I cannot explain it, Sarah. I just know that the thought of anyone hurting you makes me want to tear the world apart. And the thought of making you smile makes me happier than I have been in years. Oh, Sarah breathed, her heart racing. No one had ever spoken to her like this, had ever looked at her the way James was looking at her now, like she was something precious and worth protecting. I know it is too soon to be saying things like this, James continued, his thumb gently tracing the line of her cheekbone, careful to avoid the fading bruise. I know you barely know me, and you have every reason to be wary of trusting anyone, especially a man. But I need you to know that I am falling in love with you, Sarah Mitchell. I have been falling since that first morning, and I do not think I can stop even if I wanted to. The words unlocked something inside Sarah, something she had kept locked away for so long she had forgotten it was there. Before she could second-guess herself, she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, both of them testing this new territory. But then James's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Sarah melted into him with a soft sound of surrender. His lips were warm and firm, tasting of coffee and something indefinably him, and Sarah felt like she was coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James rested his forehead against hers. "Sarah," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. "I am falling in love with you too," Sarah whispered, the admission both terrifying and exhilarating. "I did not think I could feel this way. I did not think anyone would ever want me or care about me the way you seem to." "Then you were not thinking clearly," James said with a soft laugh. "Because you are extraordinary, Sarah. You are strong and kind and beautiful, and any man would be lucky to have your love." They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt safe. She felt cherished. She felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a future ahead of her that did not involve fear and pain. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, reality intruded. "What are we going to do?" she asked quietly. "My father will never let me go. He sees me as his property, someone to cook and clean and take his anger out on. He will not just let me walk away with you." James was silent for a long moment, thinking. "We could leave," he said finally. "Just pack up and ride out in the middle of the night. I have some money saved, and I am good at finding work. We could go anywhere, California, Colorado, maybe even up to Montana, where I have family." The idea was tempting, so tempting that Sarah almost said yes immediately. But then practicality reared its head. "He would come after us," she said sadly. "Or he would report me as stolen property or something equally horrible. You know how the law works around here? They would take his word over ours." "Not if we were married," James said slowly. "If you were my wife, legally bound to me, he would have no claim on you anymore. A woman belongs to her husband, not her father." Sarah pulled back slightly to look at him. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "Yes," James said without hesitation. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I am certain, Sarah. I want you to be my wife. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid again. I want to build a home with you, have children with you, grow old with you. So yes, I am asking you to marry me." Joy and fear warred in Sarah's heart. She wanted to say yes more than she had ever wanted anything, but the practical part of her mind raised objections. "We do not have money for a wedding, and we would need someone to perform the ceremony. The preacher in town knows my father. He might not agree to marry us without his permission." "Then we go to the next town over," James said. "Tomorrow is Sunday. We can take my horse and ride to Cypress Falls. There is a preacher there who does not know your father, and we can explain the situation. I have enough money for a marriage license and maybe a night at the boarding house." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Unless you do not want to. I will understand if this is too much, too fast." "I want to," Sarah said fiercely. "I want to be your wife, James Holloway. I want to leave this place and never look back." The smile that broke across James's face was like the sun at dawn, bright and full of promise. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Sarah felt the last of her reservations melt away. This was right. This was what she was meant to do. They made their plans in whispers, deciding to leave before dawn when Frank would still be asleep. James would pack what little he owned, and Sarah would gather her few possessions and whatever food she could manage without raising suspicion. They would ride double on James's mare until they reached Cypress Falls, get married, and then decide where to go from there. That night, Sarah barely slept. She lay in her small bed in the house, listening to her father snore, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. What if something went wrong? What if her father woke up and stopped them? What if the preacher in Cypress Falls refused to marry them? But when the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, and she crept down the stairs with her bundle of belongings, James was waiting by the barn, as promised. His horse was saddled and ready, and his face lit up when he saw her. "Ready?" he whispered. "Ready," Sarah confirmed, and let him help her onto the horse. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around to hold the reins, and Sarah leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and warm despite the cool morning air. They rode out quietly, the horse's hooves muffled by the dusty ground. Sarah kept expecting to hear her father's voice bellowing after them, but the house remained silent. As they crested the hill that marked the edge of the Mitchell property, she looked back once, saying a silent goodbye to the only home she had ever known. "No regrets?" James asked softly against her ear. "None," Sarah said firmly, and meant it. Whatever lay ahead, it had to be better than what she was leaving behind. The ride to Cypress Falls took several hours. They kept to the back roads, not wanting to risk running into anyone who might know Sarah or her father. James kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her stories about his travels, the places he had been, the things he had seen. Sarah drank it all in, fascinated by this man who had seen so much more of the world than she had. "I have never been more than 5 miles from Redemption Creek," she admitted at one point. "This is the farthest I have ever traveled." "Then we will have to make sure you see a lot more," James said warmly. "The world is big and beautiful, Sarah, and you deserve to experience all of it." They reached Cypress Falls around midday, a slightly larger town than Redemption Creek, with a proper main street and several shops. James led them to the church, a small white building with a crooked steeple, and helped Sarah down from the horse. Inside, they found the preacher, a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. James explained their situation, carefully leaving out the more brutal details, but making it clear that Sarah needed to be free of her father's household. The preacher listened thoughtfully, his gaze moving between them. "You are both of age?" he asked. "I am 20, sir," Sarah said, "and James is 24. "And you are certain this is what you want? Marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly." "I am certain," Sarah said firmly, and James nodded his agreement. The preacher smiled. "Very well. I can perform the ceremony this afternoon, if you can obtain a marriage license from the courthouse. It is just down the street." Getting the license proved simpler than Sarah had feared. The clerk asked few questions, and within an hour they were back at the church. The preacher had gathered his wife and the church deacon to serve as witnesses, and they all stood in the small sanctuary as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Sarah had dreamed of her wedding day as a girl, imagining a white dress and flowers and all her friends gathered to celebrate. The reality was far simpler. Her faded calico dress, no flowers, no family. But as she stood facing James and listened to him repeat his vows, his voice strong and sure, she realized this was better than any dream. This was real, and it was happening, and the man looking at her with such love in his eyes was about to become her husband. "I, James Michael Holloway, take you, Sarah Ann Mitchell, to be my lawfully wedded wife," James said, his hands warm around hers. "I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. In sickness and in health, in prosperity and hardship, I will stand by your side. This I swear before God and these witnesses." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks as she repeated her own vows, stumbling slightly over the words in her emotion. When the preacher finally pronounced them man and wife and told James he could kiss his bride, Sarah felt like her heart might burst from joy. The kiss was chaste and brief, mindful of their audience, but it held the promise of deeper intimacy to come. When they pulled apart, James was grinning, and Sarah could not help but smile back through her tears. "Mrs. Holloway," James said softly, testing out the name. "Mrs. Holloway," Sarah repeated, and felt a thrill run through her. She was married. She was free. She was loved. The preacher's wife, a plump woman with rosy cheeks, insisted on giving them a wedding supper, and they sat in the modest parsonage eating chicken and biscuits while the preacher and his wife shared stories of their own early marriage. It was warm and homely, and Sarah felt embraced by their kindness. As evening approached, James secured a room at the boarding house, one of only 3 available in Cypress Falls. The landlady, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, looked them over critically but accepted James's money and handed over a key. The room was small and simple, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the main street. James set down their few belongings and turned to Sarah, suddenly looking uncertain. "I want you to know that I do not expect anything tonight," he said carefully. "I know we are married, but I also know you have been through a lot, and I do not want to push you into anything you are not ready for. We can take this as slow as you need." Sarah's heart swelled with love for this considerate, gentle man. She crossed to him and took his hands in hers. "James, I am your wife. I want to be your wife in every way." She felt her cheeks heat but pressed on. "I am nervous, yes. I have never been with a man before, but I trust you, I love you, and I want this." James's eyes darkened with desire, but his touch remained gentle as he cupped her face in his hands. "I love you so much, Sarah," he murmured, then kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. What followed was tender and sweet, James taking his time to show Sarah all the ways a man could love a woman. There was some pain initially, as she had expected, but James was patient and caring, and soon the discomfort gave way to pleasure, unlike anything Sarah had ever imagined. She clung to him, marveling at the intimacy of being joined with another person, of being so completely vulnerable and yet feeling so utterly safe. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Sarah's head on James's chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her back, and she felt utterly content. "I never knew it could be like this," Sarah murmured. "I never knew anything could feel this good or this right." "That is because we belong together," James said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I truly believe that, Sarah. I think fate or God or whatever you want to call it brought me to your barn that morning. I was meant to find you. We were meant to be together." "I believe that too," Sarah said softly. She tilted her head to look up at him. "What do we do now? Where do we go?" James was quiet for a moment, thinking. "I have a cousin in Colorado," he said finally. "Near Denver, he runs a cattle operation and has been after me for years to come work for him. The pay is decent and he would give us a place to stay while we get on our feet. It is far enough from Texas that your father is unlikely to follow, and it is beautiful country from what I hear." "Colorado," Sarah said, testing the word. It sounded like an adventure, like the beginning of a whole new life. "Yes, let us go to Colorado." They left Cypress Falls the next morning, heading northwest. The journey would take weeks, they knew, but James had enough money to see them through if they were careful. They traveled slowly, stopping in small towns along the way to let James pick up odd jobs to replenish their funds. Sarah discovered that she loved traveling, loved seeing new places and meeting new people, even though she was constantly aware that every mile took them farther from her father and closer to true freedom. James proved to be an excellent companion on the road. He was resourceful and capable, able to fix a broken wagon wheel or negotiate a fair price for provisions. He was also unfailingly kind, both to Sarah and to the strangers they met along the way. Sarah watched him help an elderly woman carry her groceries, saw him give coins to a hungry child, and felt her love for him deepen with each act of casual generosity. They made love under the stars one night when they were camped far from any town, and Sarah discovered that the intimacy between them only grew stronger with time. James learned what pleased her, and she grew bolder in exploring his body, no longer shy about expressing her desires. It was a revelation, this physical aspect of marriage, and Sarah marveled that she had gone so long without knowing such joy existed. 3 weeks into their journey, they stopped in a town called Stillwater to rest and resupply. Sarah was browsing the general store, while James talked to the blacksmith about getting his horse reshod, when a voice behind her made her blood run cold. "Well, well, if it is not Frank Mitchell's runaway daughter?" Sarah spun around to find herself face to face with Tom Briggs, one of her father's drinking buddies from Redemption Creek. He was a nasty piece of work, mean when sober and meaner when drunk, and the look in his eyes now made Sarah's stomach churn with dread. "Mr. Briggs," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady, "what are you doing so far from home?" "Visiting my sister," Briggs said, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Been here a week. And what are you doing here, Missy? Your pa's been tearing up the countryside looking for you. Says you ran off with some cowboy, stole money from him." He stepped closer, and Sarah could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Says he will give a reward to anyone who brings you back." "I did not steal anything," Sarah said firmly, backing toward the door. "And I am not going back. I am married now, Mr. Briggs. Legally married. My father has no claim on me." "That is not the way he tells it," Briggs said with an ugly smile. "He says that cowboy tricked you, maybe even kidnapped you. Says it is not a real marriage." He reached out to grab her arm. "Either way, I figure that reward will spend just fine." But before his hand could close on her, James was there, moving between them with lethal grace. "Touch my wife, and you will regret it," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice that made Briggs hesitate. "Your wife?" Briggs sneered. "That is a laugh. Frank Mitchell says—" "I do not care what Frank Mitchell says," James interrupted. "Sarah is my wife. We were married by a preacher in Cypress Falls 3 weeks ago, all legal and proper. We have the marriage certificate to prove it. So, whatever lies her father is spreading, they are just that, lies." Briggs looked between them, clearly calculating his odds. James was younger and in better shape, but Briggs was bigger and probably used to fighting dirty. For a tense moment, Sarah thought it might come to blows. Then Briggs spat on the floor and stepped back. "Fine, keep the girl, but you better watch your back, Holloway. Frank Mitchell is not the forgiving type, and he has a long memory." "So do I," James said coldly. "Now get out of here before I forget I am a gentleman." Briggs left, but not before giving Sarah one last look that promised trouble. She sagged against James, her heart racing. "He is going to tell my father where we are," she said. "What if he comes after us?" "Then we will deal with it," James said firmly, though Sarah could see the worry in his eyes. "But we are not going to let him scare us into hiding. We have done nothing wrong, Sarah. You are my wife, and we have every right to be together." They left Stillwater that afternoon, deciding it was better to keep moving than to wait around for potential trouble. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting to see her father or one of his cronies riding after them. The joy of their journey was tainted by fear, and she hated that Frank Mitchell still had the power to make her feel this way. James did his best to reassure her, but Sarah could tell he was worried too. He started sleeping lighter, keeping his rifle close, and they began traveling longer days to put more distance between themselves and Texas. A week after the encounter in Stillwater, they reached the Colorado border. Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as they crossed into the new territory. Colorado was not Texas. Her father's influence did not reach here. She was safe. The landscape changed as they traveled north, becoming more rugged and beautiful. The flat plains of Texas gave way to rolling hills and then to mountains, their peaks dusted with snow even in late summer. Sarah had never seen mountains before, and she stared at them in awe. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "I had no idea the world could look like this." "Wait until you see it in winter," James said with a smile. "The whole landscape covered in snow, everything clean and white and pristine. It is like living in a painting." They reached Denver in early September, nearly 2 months after leaving Redemption Creek. The city was bigger than anything Sarah had ever seen, bustling with people and commerce. James navigated the busy streets with the ease of someone who had been in many cities before, finally leading them to a ranch about 10 miles outside of town. His cousin, Daniel Holloway, was a tall man in his 30s with the same blue eyes as James and a ready smile. He greeted them warmly, shaking James's hand and kissing Sarah's cheek like she was already family. "About time you showed up," Daniel said to James. "I have been trying to get you up here for 5 years, and you brought a wife too. That is wonderful. My Martha is going to be so happy to have another woman around. She gets tired of being outnumbered by all us men." Martha Holloway was indeed delighted to meet Sarah. She was a pretty woman with blonde hair and a generous smile, and she immediately swept Sarah into the ranch house to show her around while the men talked business. "You will have your own cabin," Martha explained, leading Sarah to a small but well-built structure near the main house. "It is not much, but it is cozy and it is private. Daniel had it built for his foreman, but he left last month to start his own place, so the timing is perfect." The cabin had 2 rooms, a main living area with a small kitchen and a bedroom just big enough for a bed and a wardrobe. It was simple, but to Sarah, who had never had a place of her own, it looked like a palace. "It is perfect," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, Martha. Thank you so much." "You are family now," Martha said warmly, pulling Sarah into a hug. "That is what family does. We take care of each other." James and Sarah moved into the cabin that same day, and James started work on the ranch the next morning. The work was hard, but James thrived on it, and he came home each evening tired but satisfied. Sarah threw herself into making the cabin a home, sewing curtains from fabric Martha gave her, planting a small garden, learning to cook better meals from Martha's patient instruction. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly happy. She woke each morning next to the man she loved, spent her days doing work that was satisfying rather than terrifying, and went to sleep each night feeling safe and cherished. The shadow of her father seemed very far away now, and she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had truly escaped. Autumn came to Colorado in a blaze of color, the aspen trees turning gold and the air taking on a crisp chill. Sarah learned to bake bread and put up preserves for the winter, skills Martha taught her with endless patience. She also learned that she was pregnant. The discovery came in mid-October when her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second month in a row. Martha had noticed Sarah's fatigue and queasiness and had gently asked the right questions. When Sarah realized what it meant, she was simultaneously thrilled and terrified. She told James that evening after dinner, too nervous to wait. He was sitting by the fire, reading an old newspaper Daniel had brought from town, and he looked up with a smile when she said his name. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, twisting her hands together. "I am pregnant, James. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, James just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a whoop of joy and scooped her up, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. "A baby! Sarah, that is wonderful. That is the best news I have ever heard." "You are happy?" Sarah asked, still needing the reassurance. "Happy?" James set her down gently, his hands cradling her face. "I am ecstatic. Sarah, you are giving me everything I have ever wanted. A wife I love, a home, and now a child. How could I be anything but happy?" They told Daniel and Martha that same evening, and the joy was shared all around. Martha immediately began planning, talking about baby clothes and cradles and all the things they would need. Daniel clapped James on the back and offered him a raise, saying a man with a family needed a little extra security. That night, lying in bed with James's hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach, Sarah felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "I wish my mother could have known about this," she said softly. "She would have been so happy to be a grandmother." "Tell me about her," James said. "You have mentioned her, but you have never really talked about what she was like." Sarah smiled in the darkness. "She was kind. That is the first thing I remember about her, how kind she was. She always had a gentle word, always saw the best in people. My father was not always the way he is now. When my mother was alive, he was different, harder working, less given to drink. I think her death broke something in him." "That does not excuse what he did to you," James said firmly. "No," Sarah agreed. "It does not. But it helps me understand it a little. He loved her so much, and when she died, he did not know how to cope. He turned to the bottle, and eventually the bottle turned him into a monster." She paused, her hand covering James's on her stomach. "I am not going to let that happen to our child. I am going to love this baby, and you are going to love this baby, and we are going to build a life where they never have to be afraid." "I promise you that," James said, kissing her temple. "Our child will grow up knowing nothing but love and security. I swear it." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the autumn and into winter. Sarah's body changed, her belly swelling with new life, and she marveled at the miracle of it. James was attentive and caring, insisting she rest more, taking on extra chores around the cabin to spare her the heavy work. Winter in Colorado was indeed as beautiful as James had promised, the world transformed into a wonderland of white. Sarah loved watching the snow fall, loved the quiet hush it brought to the landscape. But the cold and snow also meant they were more isolated, which brought both comfort and occasional worry. It was a bitter day in February when the knock came at the door. Sarah was alone in the cabin, James having gone with Daniel to check on the herd in the far pasture. She waddled to the door, her belly now prominent with 7 months of pregnancy, and opened it to find a stranger standing there. He was a rough-looking man, unshaven and dirty from travel, and something about his eyes made Sarah's blood run cold. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her hand on the door, ready to slam it shut if needed. "Looking for James Holloway," the man said. "Heard he works here." "He's not here right now," Sarah said. "What is your business with him?" The man smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Name is Jack Curtin. I am a friend of Frank Mitchell. He hired me to bring his daughter back home." Sarah felt the color drain from her face. "I am not going anywhere with you," she said, trying to close the door, but Curtin jammed his boot in the gap. "Now, do not be difficult," he said, pushing against the door. "Your pa is real worried about you. Says that Cowboy tricked you into running off with him. I am just here to bring you back where you belong." "I belong here with my husband," Sarah said fiercely, pushing back against the door with all her strength. But she was no match for the larger man. "I am married, and I am carrying his child. My father has no claim on me." "We will let the law sort that out back in Texas," Curtin said, forcing the door open wider. He grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip bruising, and she cried out in pain and fear. But before he could drag her outside, a gunshot cracked through the air. Curtin yelped and released her, stumbling back. Sarah looked up to see Martha standing in the snow, holding a rifle steady on the man. "Get off this property right now," Martha said, her voice hard as nails, "or the next shot will not be a warning." Curtin looked between the two women, clearly reassessing his odds. "You are making a mistake," he said. "Frank Mitchell will not give up. He will keep sending people until she comes back." "Then he will keep being disappointed," Martha said. "Sarah Holloway is married and expecting a child. She is part of this family, and we protect our own. Now get on your horse and ride out, or I will shoot you where you stand." Curtin spat in the snow, but turned and walked to his horse, mounted, and rode off. Sarah sagged against the doorframe, her whole body shaking. Martha lowered the rifle and hurried over, putting her arm around Sarah's shoulders. "Come on, let us get you inside," Martha said gently. "You need to sit down. That cannot have been good for the baby." Sarah let Martha lead her back into the cabin and settle her in a chair. She was crying now, great gulping sobs of fear and anger. "He found me," she choked out. "Even here, even after all this time, my father found me." "But you are safe," Martha said firmly, kneeling beside her. "We will not let anyone take you, Sarah. You have my word on that." When James and Daniel returned an hour later and heard what had happened, James went white with fury. "He sent a bounty hunter after you, after his own daughter?" "He does not see me as his daughter," Sarah said tiredly. "He sees me as his property, something that belongs to him, and he cannot stand that I escaped." "We need to do something about this," Daniel said, his jaw tight. "We cannot just wait around for the next hired gun to show up. Sarah is 7 months pregnant. She cannot be dealing with this kind of stress." "We could go to the law," James suggested. "Show them our marriage certificate. Explain the situation." "And what will they do?" Sarah asked bitterly. "Tell my father to stop. Men like him do not listen to the law unless it suits them. And besides, we are in Colorado now. The law here has no jurisdiction over what happens in Texas." They discussed it late into the night, trying to find a solution that would keep Sarah safe without requiring them to run again. Finally, Daniel had an idea. "What if we get the law involved, but not to threaten your father, to protect Sarah legally? We could get a court order, or something that officially states she is married and therefore not subject to her father's authority. That way, if anyone else shows up trying to take her, we have legal documentation to show them." It took several weeks to arrange, but Daniel rode into Denver and spoke with a lawyer who specialized in family law. The lawyer drew up papers that officially documented Sarah's marriage and stated that as a married woman, she was legally independent of her father's household. The papers were notarized and filed with the court, creating an official record. The lawyer also helped Daniel draft a letter to Frank Mitchell, explaining that his daughter was married, expecting a child, and legally beyond his reach. The letter warned that any further attempts to harass or kidnap Sarah would be met with criminal charges. Daniel sent the letter by registered mail, ensuring Frank would have to sign for it. Sarah did not know if the letter would make any difference, but having the legal documentation made her feel more secure. At least now, if anyone came looking for her, there was official proof that she had every right to be where she was. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah's pregnancy entered its final weeks. She was uncomfortable now, her back aching and her sleep interrupted by the baby's movements, but she was also excited. Soon she would hold her child in her arms, would see the physical manifestation of her love for James. Martha helped her prepare, teaching her what to expect during labor and delivery, gathering supplies for the birth. The plan was for Martha to attend the birth along with a midwife from town, ensuring Sarah would have experienced women to guide her through the process. The baby came on a warm April evening, just as the sun was setting and painting the mountains gold and pink. Sarah's labor was long and difficult, but Martha and the midwife were patient and encouraging, and James held her hand through it all, his face gray with worry, but his presence steadying her. When the baby finally emerged, slick and squalling, the midwife announced, "It is a boy." Sarah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated. James was crying, she realized, tears streaming down his face as the midwife cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. Then the tiny bundle was placed in Sarah's arms, and she looked down into her son's face for the first time. He was perfect, red and wrinkled, and absolutely perfect. He had a tuft of dark hair like James, and eyes that seemed to search her face with newborn intensity. Sarah felt love crash over her like a wave, so powerful it stole her breath. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mama, and this is your papa. We are going to love you so much." James leaned over them both, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "He is beautiful, Sarah, just like his mother." They named him Thomas, after James's father, who had died when James was young, and Samuel after Sarah's grandfather. Thomas Samuel Holloway made his presence known immediately, crying lustily when he was hungry and sleeping only in short bursts. Sarah was exhausted those first few weeks, but it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from caring for something precious. James proved to be a natural father, gentle and patient with his tiny son. He would walk the floor with Thomas when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough but pleasant voice. He changed diapers without complaint and took night shifts so Sarah could rest. Watching him with their son made Sarah fall in love with him all over again. As spring turned to summer and Thomas grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, smiling infant, Sarah felt her old life receding further and further into the past. She had not heard anything from her father since the letter was sent, and she allowed herself to hope that maybe he had finally given up, that maybe she was truly free. That hope was shattered on a hot July afternoon. Sarah was hanging laundry outside the cabin, Thomas napping in his cradle inside, when she saw a rider approaching. Her first instinct was alarm, but then she recognized the horse. It was one from the ranch. The rider was Daniel, and he was riding hard. He pulled up in a cloud of dust, his face grim. "Sarah, I need you to listen carefully and do exactly what I say. Your father is here. He arrived in town this morning asking around about you and James. He has a couple of men with him, and they are armed. I came to warn you." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What do we do?" "You and Thomas need to come to the main house right now," Daniel said. "Martha is there, and we can defend it better than this cabin. James is on his way back from the north pasture. I sent one of the hands to get him. We are going to handle this, Sarah, but I need you safe first." Sarah did not argue. She ran inside, scooped up Thomas from his cradle, and grabbed a bag with his supplies. Within minutes, she was on Daniel's horse, holding her baby close, as Daniel rode them both to the main house. Martha met them at the door, her face set in determined lines. "Come inside, honey. We have been expecting something like this might happen." The ranch hands were already gathering, 6 tough men who worked for Daniel and who had come to care about Sarah over the past months. They were armed and ready to defend the ranch and its people. James arrived 20 minutes later, his horse lathered from the hard ride. He burst through the door of the main house, his eyes wild until he saw Sarah and Thomas safe. He pulled them both into his arms, holding them tight. "I will not let him take you," James said fiercely. "I do not care what I have to do, Sarah. I will not let him take you or our son." An hour later, Frank Mitchell rode onto the ranch property with 2 hired guns flanking him. He looked older than Sarah remembered, more dissipated, but his eyes still held that familiar mean gleam. He pulled up in front of the main house and dismounted, clearly expecting to be allowed inside. Daniel stepped out onto the porch, his own gun visible on his hip and his ranch hands arranged behind him. "That is far enough, Mitchell," Daniel called out. "You are not welcome here." "I am not here for you," Frank said, his voice rough. "I am here for my daughter. I know she is here, and I am taking her back where she belongs." "Your daughter is a married woman with a child of her own," Daniel said calmly. "She does not belong to you anymore, and she is not going anywhere." "Like hell she is not," Frank snarled. "That so-called marriage was illegal. She is underage, and she did not have my permission." "She is 21 years old, well past the age of consent," James said, stepping out onto the porch beside Daniel. Sarah watched from the window, her heart in her throat, Thomas clasped tight to her chest. "And we have the marriage certificate and court documents to prove it. You have no legal claim on her, Mitchell. None at all." "She is my daughter," Frank roared. "I raised her, fed her, clothed her. She owes me." "You beat her," James said, his voice hard and cold. "You terrorized her for years. You have no right to call yourself her father." Frank's face went purple with rage. "Who do you think you are, talking to me like that? I will see you dead for turning my daughter against me." One of the hired guns moved his hand toward his gun, but immediately every ranch hand on the porch had their weapons drawn and aimed. The 2 hired guns froze, clearly reconsidering their employment. "I think you boys better ride out," one of the ranch hands said conversationally to the hired guns. "This is not your fight, and Frank Mitchell is not paying you enough to die for him." The two men exchanged glances, then very slowly turned their horses and rode away. Frank watched them go, his face twisted with fury and something that looked almost like desperation. "Sarah!" he called out suddenly. "Sarah, come out here and talk to me. You are my daughter. You are my blood. You cannot just throw that away." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of years of guilt and obligation pressing down on her. Part of her, the part that had been conditioned by years of abuse to obey, wanted to go out there, wanted to try to make peace. But then Thomas whimpered in her arms, and she opened her eyes and looked down at her son's innocent face. No, she would not go back. She would not subject herself or her child to Frank Mitchell's poison. She had built a new life, a good life, and she deserved to keep it. She handed Thomas to Martha and walked to the door, stepping out onto the porch despite James's protests. She stood between James and Daniel, their presence giving her strength, and looked down at her father. "I am not your daughter anymore," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong. "I stopped being your daughter the first time you hit me. You made my childhood a nightmare, and you turned my mother's death into an excuse for cruelty. I do not owe you anything, Father. Not my obedience, not my presence, and certainly not my love." "You ungrateful," Frank started, but Sarah cut him off. "I am grateful," Sarah said. "I am grateful that I found the courage to leave. I am grateful for James, who showed me what real love looks like. I am grateful for Daniel and Martha, who gave us a home. And I am grateful for my son, who will never know what it is like to be afraid in his own house." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with pity. "I am sorry for you, Father. I am sorry that you loved a bottle more than you loved your own daughter. I am sorry that you are so broken you cannot see what you have done. But I am done paying for your pain. Go back to Texas. Go back to your empty house and your bottles. Leave me alone." For a moment, Frank just stared at her, and Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or recognition of all he had lost. But then the moment passed, and his face hardened again. "You will regret this," he said. "You think you are safe here, but you are not. I will find a way to make you pay for this betrayal. If you come near my wife or my son again, I will kill you," James said flatly. "That is not a threat, Mitchell. That is a promise. You have terrorized Sarah for the last time. Now get off this property before we have you arrested for trespassing." Frank Mitchell looked around at the armed men, at the determined faces, and seemed to finally understand that he had lost. He was outnumbered and outgunned, and there was no one here who would help him. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked like an old, broken man. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away without another word. Sarah watched him go, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. She had stood up to her father, had finally broken free completely, but there was no triumph in it, only a kind of weary resolution. James put his arm around her, pulling her close. "You were so brave," he murmured. "I am so proud of you, Sarah." "I just want it to be over," Sarah said, leaning into him. "I want to never think about him again." "Then that is what we will do," James promised. "We will put him in the past where he belongs and focus on our future." They never heard from Frank Mitchell again. Sarah learned later, through a letter from an old acquaintance in Redemption Creek, that her father had returned to Texas and died 6 months later from liver failure, the drink finally claiming him as it had been threatening to do for years. Sarah felt sadness at the news, but not grief. She grieved for the father he might have been, not the man he had become. Life on the ranch continued, peaceful and productive. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler, always getting into things and making everyone laugh. Sarah and James talked about having more children, and Sarah found she loved the idea of building a large family, of filling their home with love and laughter. Their second child, a daughter they named Grace Martha, after both their mothers, arrived when Thomas was 2. She was a quiet baby, easier than her brother had been, with James's blue eyes and Sarah's brown hair. Watching James with his daughter, seeing the gentle way he held her, and the love in his eyes, made Sarah's heart overflow. Over the years, they added to their family. Another son, William, came 2 years after Grace, followed by twin girls, Emma and Lily, 3 years after that. Their little cabin became too small, and with Daniel's help, James built a larger house on a piece of land Daniel sold them, making them true landowners instead of just hired help. Sarah threw herself into motherhood and homemaking with joy she never knew existed. She loved teaching her children to read, loved baking bread with tiny hands helping, loved the chaos and noise of a full house. She and Martha became as close as sisters, their children growing up together like cousins. James proved to be everything Sarah had hoped for, and more. He was a devoted father, patient and playful, and he never raised his hand to his children in anger. The contrast between him and her own father was so stark that sometimes Sarah would just watch him playing with the children and feel overwhelmed with gratitude that she had escaped, that she had found this good man. Their love deepened with the years. They knew each other's rhythms now, could communicate with just a look. They still made love regularly, still found time to steal kisses in the barn or hold hands while watching the sunset. James told her often that she was beautiful, that he loved her, that he was grateful every day that he had found her hiding in that barn so many years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked him one evening as they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 12 now, tall and serious, helping his younger siblings build a fort. Grace was 10, mothering the twins with patient affection. William was 8, full of mischief and energy. And the twins, Emma and Lily, were 5, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. "Regret what?" James asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Stopping at that barn that morning," Sarah said, "taking on all my problems. You could have had an easier life if you had just ridden past." James looked at her like she had grown a second head. "Sarah, finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children are my whole world. How could I possibly regret the thing that brought me everything I have ever wanted?" Sarah smiled, leaning into him. "I love you, James Holloway." "I love you too, Sarah Holloway," James said, kissing the top of her head. "I always have, and I always will." As the sun set over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. She thought about the terrified young woman she had been, hiding in a barn from her cruel father, certain she had no future worth living. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. James had found her in that barn and had told her she could hide there forever. But he had given her something so much better than a hiding place. He had given her freedom. He had given her love. He had given her a life worth living and a family worth fighting for. The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and challenges. The ranch prospered under James's management, and he and Daniel eventually became full partners in the operation. Sarah started teaching at the small school that opened in the nearest town, discovering she had a gift for working with children. She loved seeing young minds light up with understanding, loved being part of her community in a meaningful way. Thomas grew into a fine young man, serious and responsible, with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassionate heart. He started courting a girl from town when he was 18, and Sarah and James watched with pride as their eldest son fell in love. Grace was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing and painting the beautiful Colorado landscape. William was the adventurous one, always planning expeditions into the mountains or talking about traveling to see the ocean. And the twins, Emma and Lily, were inseparable. Emma bold and outspoken, while Lily was thoughtful and reserved. Sarah made sure all her children knew they were loved, that they were valued, that their voices mattered. She was determined that they would never feel the fear and worthlessness she had felt growing up. She and James created a home filled with warmth and laughter, where mistakes were opportunities to learn rather than reasons for punishment, where every child felt safe to be themselves. On their 20th anniversary, James surprised Sarah with a trip to Denver, just the two of them. Daniel and Martha agreed to watch the children, and Sarah and James spent 3 glorious days in the city, staying in a proper hotel, eating in restaurants, and just enjoying each other's company without the constant demands of parenthood. On their last evening, as they walked through the city park watching the sunset, James stopped and took both her hands in his. "I want to tell you something," he said seriously. Sarah looked up at him, concerned by his tone. "What is it?" "I want you to know that every single day of the last 20 years has been a gift," James said, his blue eyes intense. "Watching you grow from that frightened girl in the barn into the confident, amazing woman you are now has been the greatest privilege of my life. You are an incredible mother, a talented teacher, a pillar of our community, and the love of my life. I want you to know that I see you, Sarah. I see all that you are and all that you do, and I am in awe of you." Tears streamed down Sarah's cheeks. "James," she whispered, unable to find adequate words for the love flooding her heart. "I know we did not have a proper wedding," James continued. "No flowers, no fancy dress, no celebration. So, I wanted to give you something to mark all these years together." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with 3 small diamonds set in it. One diamond for the past we have overcome, one for the present we share, and one for the future we are building together. Sarah could barely see the ring through her tears as James slipped it onto her finger, right next to the simple gold band she had worn since their wedding day. "It is beautiful," she managed. "You are beautiful, James Holloway, inside and out." They kissed there in the park as the sun set, and Sarah felt like the luckiest woman in the world. She had gone from having nothing, being nothing, to having everything that mattered. She had a husband who loved her, children who filled her life with joy, friends who valued her, and a place in the world that was entirely her own. 20 years became 25, then 30. The children grew up and started lives of their own. Thomas married his sweetheart and gave Sarah and James their first grandchild, a boy they named James after his grandfather. Grace fell in love with a teacher from Denver and moved to the city, though she visited often. William did eventually make it to the ocean, traveling to California and sending letters full of his adventures. The twins both married brothers from a neighboring ranch and stayed close by, giving Sarah and James a steady stream of grandchildren to spoil. Sarah and James grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They still lived in the house James had built, though it was quieter now, with just the 2 of them. They still worked, though not as hard as they once had. And they still loved each other with the intensity of young lovers, even as their bodies slowed and ached with age. On a warm spring evening when Sarah was 60 and James was 64, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, as they had done countless times before. Sarah's hand was in James's, their fingers intertwined, and she felt utterly at peace. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" Sarah asked quietly. James smiled. "Easy now, I am not going to hurt you." "And then you said I could hide there forever," Sarah continued. "In the barn, you said you would protect me." "I did," James agreed, "and I have spent every day since then keeping that promise." "You have," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "You have given me the most wonderful life, James. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," James corrected gently. "You gave my life meaning, Sarah. You gave me a reason to be better, to do better. Everything good in my life came from that moment when I walked into that barn and saw you hiding there." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Around them, the ranch was peaceful, the cattle lowing softly in the distance, the evening birds singing their last songs of the day. Inside the house, pictures of their children and grandchildren covered the walls, testaments to the family they had built together. Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that terrified girl in the barn to this contented woman surrounded by love. It had not always been easy. There had been hard times, sad times, moments when she had struggled with the scars her father had left on her soul. But James had been there through all of it, patient and loving, helping her heal, helping her grow. "I would do it all again," Sarah said suddenly. "Every difficult moment, every hardship, every fear. I would do it all again if it meant ending up here with you." James turned to look at her, his blue eyes still as clear and honest as they had been that first morning. "So would I," he said simply. "So would I." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah rested her head on James's shoulder and closed her eyes, feeling his steady heartbeat beneath her cheek. She was home. After all the years of running, of hiding, of fearing, she was finally, truly home. And it was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. Years later, when Sarah was 73 and James was 77, they celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house was packed with people, all of them there because of the love that Sarah and James had built together. Thomas gave a toast, his own children gathered around him. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us what real love looks like, who showed us that family is built on trust and respect and kindness, who proved that the past does not have to define the future. Thank you for everything you have given us." Sarah's eyes filled with happy tears as everyone raised their glasses and cheered. She looked at James, saw the emotion in his eyes, and knew he was feeling the same overwhelming gratitude she felt. They had built this. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Sarah and James lay in bed holding hands, just as they had done for over 50 years. Sarah felt tired but happy, full of the joy of the day. "That was perfect," she murmured. "Absolutely perfect." "You are perfect," James said, his voice rough with age but still warm. "You have always been perfect to me, Sarah." "I love you," Sarah said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she had said them all those years ago in the barn. "I love you so much, James." "I love you too," James replied, more than words can say. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts beating in rhythm, two souls who had found each other in the darkness and built a lifetime of light together. Sarah Mitchell Holloway lived to be 87 years old. She was surrounded by her family when she passed peacefully in her sleep, her hand held tight in James's. She had lived a long, full, happy life, rich with love and purpose. She had been a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, a teacher, and a friend. She had been brave and strong and kind, and she had been loved. Oh, how she had been loved. James grieved her deeply, but found comfort in their children and in the knowledge that they had had 57 beautiful years together. He lived another 3 years after Sarah, and when he passed at the age of 91, it was with a smile on his face and Sarah's name on his lips. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a simple gravestone that read, "James and Sarah Holloway, beloved parents and grandparents. They found each other in darkness and built a life of light." The legacy they left behind was not measured in money or land, though they had accumulated both. Their true legacy was in the family they had created, the values they had instilled, the love they had demonstrated. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren carried forward the lessons they had learned, that love is patient and kind, that family is worth fighting for, that the past can be overcome, and that everyone deserves to feel safe and cherished. The little cabin where they had first lived was preserved by the family, turned into a sort of shrine to Sarah and James's early years together. Inside, hanging on the wall, was their original marriage certificate from Cypress Falls, yellowed with age but still legible. Beside it hung a drawing Grace had done of her parents when she was young, showing them standing together, James's arm around Sarah's shoulders, both of them smiling. And in the barn, the very barn where James had first found Sarah all those years ago, there was a plaque that Thomas had installed after both his parents had passed. It read simply, "This is where it all began. This is where my father found my mother and told her she could hide here forever. But he gave her so much more than a hiding place. He gave her freedom, love, and a future. May we all be so blessed to find someone who sees us when we are hiding and loves us anyway." The story of Sarah and James became legend in the family, passed down through generations, as an example of what love should look like. Young people courting would hear about how James had protected Sarah from her cruel father, how he had stood up for her, how he had built a life with her based on mutual respect and deep affection. They would hear about how Sarah had found the courage to leave everything she knew, and how James had been patient with her healing. And always the story would end the same way, with the reminder that true love is not just about passion and romance, though Sarah and James had plenty of both. True love is about seeing someone at their most vulnerable, at their most scared, at their most broken, and choosing to stand beside them. True love is about building something together, day by day, year by year. True love is about creating a safe harbor in a stormy world. Sarah and James Holloway had done all that and more. They had taken a chance encounter in a barn and turned it into a lifetime of devotion. They had overcome abuse and fear and distance and hardship. They had raised a family, built a community, and left the world better than they found it. But most importantly, they had loved each other, completely, deeply, faithfully, and forever. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. The ranch they had built continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own touches, but always respecting the foundation that Sarah and James had laid. The town they had been part of grew into a small city, but the Holloway family remained an integral part of it, known for their generosity and kindness. On clear nights, when the stars were bright over the Colorado mountains, descendants of Sarah and James would sometimes stand on the hill where their ancestors were buried and look out over the land they had tamed together. They would think about the courage it had taken for Sarah to run, for James to stay, for both of them to choose love over fear, and they would be grateful. Grateful for the legacy they had inherited, grateful for the example they had been given, grateful that, once upon a time, a cowboy had walked into a barn and found a woman hiding from her cruel father, and instead of walking away, he had said 5 words that would change everything. "You can hide here forever." But James had given her so much more than forever. He had given her today and tomorrow and every day in between. He had given her a reason to stop hiding and start living. He had given her everything, and in the end, that was the greatest love story of all.